The Secret Science at Work by Max Freedom Long. Chapter 22. The Secret Meaning Behind the Foot Washing Rite. It is a difficult thing to pass over the 3 years of the ministry of Jesus. Huna principles are revealed in every parable, in every cryptic saying. It is fascinating to watch the great kahuna at work, healing the sick bodies and the minds of the people, just as kahunas have done wherever the initiates of Huna have been at work. We have said that Jesus healed many, perhaps thousands, by the laying on of hands, but it is in the detailed cases of his healing that we find corroboration of the methods used by the kahunas of Hawaii. He used suggestion. He broke down complexes, as in the case of the paralytic boy, let down through the roof of the house where Jesus was staying with Peter. He drove out evil spirits, as in the case of the epileptic boy, brought to him by the boy's father. He used physical stimulus in healing the man who was deaf and had an impediment in his speech. Jesus had a highly developed psychic sense and used it in diagnosis. This may have been a natural gift, or his low self may well have been trained in telepathy during his years of work with initiates prior to his appearance as a kahuna. He diagnosed the troubles of patients by telepathic means, having thereby no need of questioning them. He used absent treatment in some cases, which we know is a telepathic process. All this demonstration puts on a sound basis, even our humble efforts in the HRA to develop the telepathic nature of the low self. It also corroborates and makes less strange the successful work of physicians today who are using the pendulum to get the low self telepathic knowledge of the patient's condition for diagnosis. It would take an entire book to tell all the teachings and healings of Jesus reveal as to Huna. Someday, I hope that book may be written. There is space here only to indicate the importance of such a project. In the meantime, we are content to go on with the retelling of the 3 dramatic incidents in the life of Jesus, finding in them the deep and hidden Huna meanings. So, we come to the night of the Last Supper. Jesus knew, with the foreknowledge that comes only from the high self, that he was to be betrayed and crucified. As a matter of fact, Caiaphas, the high priest, had already called a meeting of the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders to plan to take Jesus by subtlety. Subtlety. This is a word I'm not familiar with. subtility. Subtlety. To take Jesus by subtlety and kill him. They had people on the watch for him so that his whereabouts would be reported and they could arrest him. It was one of Jesus' own disciples, Judas, who went to the chief priests and offered to deliver Jesus to them for a sum of money. They agreed upon 30 pieces of silver. After that, Judas was waiting for a good opportunity to fulfill his part of the bargain. Jesus desired to observe the feast of the Passover in Jerusalem and sent Peter and John out to prepare it. He told them, with his foreknowledge from the high self, just where to find a suitable room, a furnished upper room in a house in the city. Peter and John found it, as predicted by Jesus, and prepared the feast. There we have the dramatic ingredients, as the 12 disciples sat down with Jesus to eat in that upper room. The one who knew he was to be betrayed, the betrayer who had made the bargain, the 11 others, unknowing of what was about to happen, and all eating together as was their wont. Jesus, knowing that he was soon to leave them, wanted this last meeting because, as Luke says, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. They began the supper with the initiation of the rite of communion, which will be discussed later. Then Jesus spoke, very sadly, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me." The disciples looked at each other, startled, wondering which one of them he meant. Judas must have masked his face successfully. The others began asking anxiously of Jesus, Is it I?" Peter signaled to John, the beloved disciple who was leaning on Jesus' breast, to ask Jesus to name the man, and John asked the question. Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I shall give a sop when I have dipped it." He dipped a piece of bread into some kind of soup or sauce and handed it to Judas. Judas tried to dissemble, asking, no doubt, with the hope of appearing innocent, "Master, is it I?" "Thou hast said," Jesus answered shortly, and bade him, "Thou dost do it quickly." The other disciples did not know what this interchange meant, but since Judas was in charge of their common purse, they took it for granted that he had been sent on some errand when Judas left the room immediately. Later that night, in the garden across a brook, the brook Cedron, 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 where Jesus and his disciples had adjourned after the Last Supper, Judas led unto him the chief priests and the scribes and the elders, together with a mob armed with swords and staves. Judas went up to Jesus and kissed him, prearranged signal with his conspirators that this was the man they sought. What was the matter with Judas? He had been associated for some time with Jesus. Who could have cleared the terrible fixation of greed which possessed him? He had apparently gone along with the humble, almost poverty-stricken life of the followers, but had not expressed the depth of his greed until this time. Jesus knew it and said after the communion rite, "I speak not of you all. I know whom I have chosen, but that the scripture may be fulfilled, he that eateth bread with me hath lifted up his heel against me." Perhaps Judas was to be left as the great example of the depths to which greed in the low self can lead a human being. So it was Peter who really worried Jesus. Good, bluff, honest, loving Peter was to be saved to carry the new teachings, as he did later, to far pagan Rome, where he gave up his life for it. But Peter's low self harbored But Peter's low self harbored a fear complex, and there was apparently no better way to resolve it than to let Peter express it in an act which would make him aware, be bitterly ashamed, and then remove it. Jesus told Peter during the supper that he, Peter, would deny knowing his leader. Peter was astounded. His middle self rejected such an idea as impossible, but he did not know the power of the fear complex in his low self. Jesus asked him, "Lovest thou me?" And Peter fervently assured him that he did. Then Jesus said, "Feed my lambs," looking forward to Peter's ministry, for which he must be saved. Jesus asked the question 3 times, and 3 times Peter reaffirmed his love, and 3 times Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." There is something of great significance in this from the Huna standpoint. The Kahunas always repeated 3 times any important message or prayer, and always in the same words. Peter did deny that he knew Jesus, and he denied it 3 times to different people. When Jesus was taken, a bound prisoner, to the palace of the high priest, love impelled Peter to follow Jesus there, and only one other disciple went that far. But fear gripped him, fear for his own safety, when these people recognized him as one of the followers of Jesus. After the last denial, Jesus turned and looked at Peter. He said nothing, but what volumes must have been in that look. Peter, instantly remembering that Jesus had predicted that he would deny him thrice, went out and wept bitterly. In that moment, the fear complex was utterly dissolved, and his whole subsequent history is that of a sublimely courageous man. But let us go back to the supper table where the disciples, all but Judas, had gone on his nefarious business, were sitting with Jesus. We have not yet told of the important foot washing rite. It was mainly for Peter's sake, I think, that Jesus instituted the rite, though it taught all of them the necessary technique of removing complexes when they should begin their ministry. The supper was finished. Jesus rose from his place and laid aside his garments. He took a towel and girded himself. Then he poured water in a basin and began to wash the feet of the disciples. He wiped them with the towel with which he was girded. This was a new and strange performance. The disciples did not understand it and were abashed and uncomfortable to have their master doing a servant's work. But when we look at this closely, we see that the things used and the things done are full of symbols and hidden meaning once we translate them into the sacred language. Jesus took a towel and girded himself. In other words, he made a loincloth out of the towel. In the language of the Kahunas, that is a malo, M-A-L-O, and the same word means both loincloth and towel. Malo has the secret meaning of to dry out. Does not that have a familiar ring to the reader by now? Mana is to be dried out of the fixation memory clusters. Mana is to be dried out of the fixation memory clusters. Once the mana is taken out of such complexes, they are broken up. We know in the work of our modern psychologists that once the strength and the energy of emotions tied up in fixations is released, the fixations die. Jesus poured water into a basin. No one who has read this far can fail to recognize that water is a symbol of mana. Jesus was providing a supply of mana to his own high self, to be used for the benefit of those whose feet were to be washed. Why were their feet to be washed? Feet are the Huna symbol for the low self. There was the blocking of fear in the low self of Peter, so that he could not send mana to his own high self. As for the other disciples, the record does not state. It concentrates on Peter. The Polynesian word for feet is wawe, W-A-W-A-E, made of the roots wa and we. Wa gives us one meaning, a space between 2 points of time. Such a space of time must be included in any memory when we recall a past event. In the method of an analyst working with a patient, the events causing fixations are recalled. Once such events are brought to the focus of the consciousness and are understood in their true perspective, they become rationalized and are no longer outlaw memories or fixations. Another meaning of wa is to think, reflect, ponder, turn over and over in the mind. This describes the rationalization process which takes place. The third meaning of wa is to throw up or vomit up something. This is a symbol of getting rid of fixations, lodged in the low self. The second root, way, W-A-E, gives us to break up and sort the good from the bad, which describes the process of breaking down fixation memories and rationalizing them. It also means to dwell upon the mind in thinking of an event, to reflect, consider a case, to make a choice, all describing the process of weighing and rationalizing a fixation-causing event. We see then the extremely significant fact that Jesus chose to wash the feet, the low self, of his disciples in demonstrating symbolically the method for the removal of complexes. Even the word for the basin he used, pa, P-A, in the sacred language contains meanings which indicate the inability of those with blocked paths to send mana to their own high selves, to be dried out or parched. The word pa also has the meaning of to divide something between parties. In the case of the rite performed by Jesus, it is the dividing of the mana provided by him, as symbolized by the water in the basin, between his own high self and the high self of the one to be cleansed. A final meaning hidden in the word is to touch, and this is the completion of the whole process. It is the symbol of reaching out along the aka cord to contact or touch the higher self, the high self. This must be done before the mana can be given to it. Jesus then brought the basin full of Huna meaning and used the towel, also full of meaning, to wash the feet of Peter. Peter, uncomfortable and unhappy, objected. Jesus told him, "What I do thou knowest not now, but thou shalt know hereafter." Indeed, Peter must have discovered very soon what was meant by the rite, after his denial of Jesus and after his complex dissolved out in tears. He must have pondered the matter deeply then and used the technique in his service of healing others. But at the time Jesus was washing his feet, Peter said impulsively, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus told him that was not necessary. It was only his feet, his low self, that needed washing. "Ye are clean, but not all." For he knew Peter's low self harbored the fear complex. After he had finished washing his feet and resumed his garments, sat down, Jesus told them that he had given them an example and that henceforth they should wash one another's feet. The technique that emerges from the maze of symbols is substantially this. The person whose aka cord path to his own high self is blocked by fixations may seek to help the one whose path is not blocked. That man or woman can give the power of mana to his own high self and asks that it be used to break up the fixations in the petitioner. This helper need not be a kahuna. The disciples were told that they could and they should help each other in this way. It was evident that Jesus did not consider this aid possible only to one of his own great powers. It is sufficient that the helper be one who has demonstrated that he is in touch with his high self, in other words, has had his prayers answered, and can accumulate a large surcharge of mana for the use of the two high selves in breaking up the fixations of another's low self. From the hidden meanings found in the Polynesian words for feet and basin, I would also conclude that the foot washing rite indicates a talking out process between the complex person and his helper, leading to a rationalization of the memory tangles. Because of the experiences of amateurs today attempting to do this for a friend, succeeding only in stirring up the hidden troubles, not knowing how to resolve them, It seems essential for any helper to have had some training along that line, a combination of a person who has his own path to his high self in fine working order, plus a knowledge of how to use suggestion and physical stimulus, and how to help rationalize the fixations when surfaced, would seem to be ideal. If the knowledge uncovered in the Huna meanings of the words used in this rite seem reminiscent of that gained in the rite of baptism, the fact is that it is the same. It was repeated by the initiate recorders of the events for reasons of emphasis and to make sure that the truth of the way to the salvation of mankind should be preserved. It was the method the Polynesians used. The hiding of the secret is commonly used in commonly used words. Let me read that sentence again. It was the method the Polynesians used. The hiding of the secret in commonly used words. Would one expect to find a noble philosophy and a technique for using it in such words as way, confess, water, fan, basin, and feet? The very retelling of the foot-washing rite, which seems seldom to have been used in the Christian church as the baptism and communion rites have been, brings to light why it has been avoided. The clericals and scholars simply could not fathom its meaning. No wonder it's been passed over as merely a lesson in humility. But Jesus would never have acted it out as a rite if it had not had a great and deep significance. Another thing had to be guarded against for the future. Any of the rites might be discarded by those ignorant of Huna meanings, just as the foot-washing rite has been. But if even one remained to reveal the truth, when the time came for it to be revealed, it would thus be preserved and available. The remaining initiates of the ancient lore disappeared from the Mediterranean region in the early centuries after the death of Jesus, so we have no further literature on the subject from that source. And that concludes that chapter. Chapter 23 is entitled The Secret Meaning Behind the Communion Rite.